Next up, we've got Leo White showing us his big track project, or possibly projects. Just take a minute to do so.
This is a right circuit. Don't break. Most, that's
Okay. Other than the taskbar and the irritating message about being on the screen. Maybe it'll go away. Yeah, well, the bottom hasn't, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, my presentation is basically a collection of slides, so not as fancy as the one we just saw. So, okay, so I'm Leo. I've probably already spent half of you out on the show floor, and talking about these big tracks that I've been playing with. Yeah, there we go. This is my latest iteration. So we should go through the history. that'll be exciting. Okay, so I got my first Raspberry Pi back in May 2012. Like pretty much everybody, or a lot of people back then, you go in, all the servers going down, you eventually get your order in, and then it turns up about 3 months later anyway. So the first thing I did then was the really simple stuff. You go down to Mafflin's, other electronic stores are available. I've got some LED lights, make them come on and off by the GPIOs, and also they had these nice little USB robot arms that just conveniently happened to be on offer that weekend as well. And I think this shows about the strengths that the Raspberry Pi is built on, because it was Linux based. Despite the fact that the Raspberry Pi was a new system, I'd only had it for a couple of days. There was lots of information about approaching these things from just Linux anyway. So whilst the robot arm itself only came with Windows drivers, 10 minutes on Google found me the information I needed, and about 15 minutes later I was controlling it from the Raspberry Pi. So I know lots of people go, search for this and how to do this on Raspberry Pi. A lot of it is how you do it on any old Linux system, just with the bonus of things like GPIO. So I wanted to do something a bit more interesting. I'd had my eye on this lovely shiny big Trak model for a while. I'd had one back in the 80s until it eventually broke down some stairs. And I've been eyeing this one up. They re-released it in 2000. And I've been putting it off because it costs money. I needed a better excuse rather than I had this as a kid. So eventually I thought, well, what I want to do is try and take one of these, put a Raspberry Pi in it, do some controls. And by this time they'd conveniently dropped down about £20 in price. So that was pretty reasonable. And what followed then was a fair amount of looking around, research on robotics, big tracks in general. Again, people had started these sort of things before. There's actually quite a lot of information about the 1980s model and all the transistors and everything that's on it. And also there's a lot of people who had started big Trak projects, but not really gotten very far, both sort of the Linux general stuff and some people looking into the Raspberry Pi. So got some more components, some breadboards, lots of cables. It's a complete mess. And I did actually get a little showing at the first Cambridge Raspberry Jam back in July last year. I was actually there for the RISCOS stuff. At the start of the lectures, it wasn't actually working, so I was actually coding away on it during the first lecture, I think, when someone came up and said, I want to take it for a drive, which they then probably did. So there's a very short clip of that on YouTube. So won't bother trying to get up here, just in case I screw over the network again. But this is basically what it looked like back in back then. Then following it up, I find having these sort of events is a great motivator to actually get things done. Otherwise, it just sits there on the shelf gathering dust. So shortly after the Cambridge Raspberry Jam, there was going to be a London one, and for this one, I didn't do much more other than getting these sort of rockets launching. Now, the original ones for the big Trak were sort of IR driven, so like your remote control for your TV. So all I needed was the IR code to be able to fire it. My big Trak was no longer in a position to provide me with that, so I got a second big Trak, solely at that point, solely for the ability to record the IR signal so I could play it back. And then follow some investigations about getting LIRC up and running on the Raspberry Pi. Luckily some people had it up and running on the GPIO pins. Back then you had to do lots of recompilation of kernels and stuff to get it working. These days it's all done for you, so it's much easier now than it was 12 months ago. But I eventually got that up and running, and at the London Raspberry Jam added a fire command that would do the little IR. And at that point I was manually running it and it fired the rockets. So that was all making progress. And then obviously I now had a second big Trak that I had no particular use for now that I'd gotten the IR signals out of it. So the question is what to do with that. Now at the first London Raspberry Jam, they asked what you wanted to get out of the event and what you planned to do. My first response was beer. which was quite easy to complete as we were at the Mozilla open space and we have a bar. And the second one I said was I wanted to attach a robot arm to a big truck. Now, quite a few months later than that, so I was targeting something like the old scutters from Red Dwarf. I sort of mentioned around a lot. And so I was targeting the Briscoe London show, which was in the October, so from July to October I had to work on this. And this was hacked together, literally with a hacksaw, cutting the battery box off of this robot arm. And I got it working just before midnight, the night before the show. As you can see, there's little bits of tape holding it together, cables everywhere. So it just about worked, but it ran for a while. Actually, no, it ran all day. There were lots of kids coming in having a look at it, building little walls, driving it through the little walls, and so on. And so, yeah, that was up. I'd achieved what I said I was going to do at the London Raspberry Jam. I had my initial scutter. But obviously, it was a bit messy. So the next step was to do a bit of tidy up. So, as you can see, this is quite iterative. So you decide you need to do something to get there, you then decide you need to do something else, and you have to do some research to find out how you're going to get there. Again, this led me on to issues such as, for both the big trucks, I had two sets of batteries. They were the original batteries that I was using to drive the motors, and then one of these mobile USB charging batteries that I was using for powering the Pi itself. Now obviously it's a bit of a duplication of hardware. So I looked around for what would A, fit in here, and B, provide an appropriate amount of power. And that led me onto forums about radio control helicopters and lithium polymer batteries. It led me to YouTube, lots of videos of them exploding. So I thought, yes, that's just what I need. So I made a few adjustments to the big tracks, cut out some of the internal battery compartment, and then the single battery system with a couple of voltage changes that would get it all up and running. And from the one on the left, that's the one that got changed. So the Raspberry Pi was now internal to the system, looked a bit more complete. Again, this was shown off at a London Raspberry Jam, hence the bottom. And the Mozilla logo, or Firefox logo, you can just about make out. Then I had a bit of an accident. Whilst on the way to one of the London Raspberry Jam, I tipped the tube in, suitcase over cobblestones and so on. One of my power cables snapped off, the light pin raked around inside and killed one of my Raspberry Pis. So I decided, I'd been thinking that I needed to go away from the breadboard design, do things properly. That rather told me that yes, that is what I should have done. And now I had a dead Raspberry Pi to show me that the errors of my ways. So again, a bit of research, and I think one thing that was quite popular, things like the Arduino shields, and the Raspberry Pi was starting to gain its own sort of versions. This particular one, I think, is just an Adafruit proto-Pi plate. So basically everything that was on the breadboard and just plugged together with jumper leads, moved on to there, soldered it all in place, and this massively reduced the amount of space it required. So once more I was able to do another iteration for the main big track. Now from the outside it looks completely unmodified, but inside it's got a Raspberry Pi, it's got a Bluetooth receiver, a Wi-Fi receiver, and all the components for driving it around and firing the infrareds. So again, you gradually learn things, it gets a little better. This is my pristine one, and then this is the not quite so pristine one. Then, yeah, moving on from there, so had a nice platform, drove around, wanted to do more with it. Picked up a cheap USB webcam, got lucky in the fact that it actually supported hardware and JPEG compression. So again, got hunted around, found an application called MJPEG Streamer, we just chucked that across the network with minimal impact on the Raspberry Pi itself. So I was able to shove a camera on it, go to work, and then drive it around my house from work. Which was quite nice. But that's you know, that's good. 15 miles away from home, all over the internet, and got a reasonably good resolution picture out of that one. Hit a few things. Eventually got stuck on a sock, I think. So this is pretty much the state I got to, or was that a little bit tidier when this sort of Cambridge Raspberry Jam was announced, and I thought, well, it's been 14 months, well back then probably about a year, since my big Trak had first been at the Cambridge Raspberry Jam, and I thought, well, it's a good excuse to get some upgrades in. So a slightly expensive robot arm, I thought I would, the plastic one, whilst it was a good starter, the Raspberry Pi doesn't know where the arm is, so if you move it around and then reboot your Raspberry Pi, it's quite happy to try and keep moving the robot arm further than it's meant to. And well, whilst it's got a bit of power behind it, it's struggled a bit, so I thought I'd upgrade with something that was a bit more stronger. So metal chassis, and it uses servos. So the main difference between the motors and the servos is that you can say things such as move to 30 degrees or 6 degrees, and it will move there and it will stay there. So if I try moving this, it bumps against me and wants to stay in the same place, whereas the other robot arm, you give it enough force and it will start moving. So that would eventually, or it will eventually sort of allow and open up the ability to sort of do object detection and then have the Raspberry Pi automatically try and pick up objects. One of my thoughts was getting to play chess would be nice. My follow-up thought was dross would be considerably easier. It's circular and it's this colour, right, that's my piece. Rather than, well, it's a horse shape rotated at 30 degrees, and yeah, that wasn't going to be simple. So again, just did a fair amount of research, learning new things. Despite all that, I still managed to burn out one of the servos whilst I was working out how to drive it. So when I get around to writing this up, there will be a "this is how you do it in a safe way" note there. And that pretty much leads me to where I was today. So this sort of came together over the past month or two. I think a lot of people have probably already seen this, but sort of main components, you've obviously got your Raspberry Pi and the sort of Adafruit proto plate in the centre, doing all the fun stuff. Battery sort of coming through from the bottom, and we've got one 5-volt converter that drives the Raspberry Pi. I decided that I would attach that to the USB cable instead of going through the normal USB power, so that it would benefit from all the fuses and so on. Got a bit worried about blowing it up by feeding to the GPIO pins directly. Got a little USB hub there that's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on. Again, this is something that it's easier to do now than it was. The original revision 1 Raspberry Pi, there's all this issue around polyfuses on USB and have all sorts of problems with sort of USB webcams and so on unless you use the powered hub. The revision 2 Model A's and Model B's, all those issues seem to go away. They've obviously removed a lot of those issues, and it's a lot more reliable now to sort of drive hubs and cameras from hubs without needing all the bulky powered hubs in there. So again, it helps me save a bit of space. Obviously the arm itself is firmly bolted in there, and whilst testing the event, it can pull quite a bit of power. So I got a big 8-amp capable voltage adapter for it. The battery is designed for radio control helicopters, so it can supply up to 300 amps. Don't let the positive and ground touch because they weld together, and then the battery gets very hot and explodes. It's safe for kids. And to actually control the robot arm, whilst for the motors I'm doing this via a sort of PWM controllers via the GPIO pins in software. For the arm, it needed something that was a bit more accurate. So I got, again, have a look around, and there's this another Adafruit product. Other Pi PCB accessory manufacturers are available. And they had a 16-channel WM servo controller that fitted in nicely at the front. Lots of tidying up of wires and so on, and it eventually all came together. it's fairly neat at the moment. There's actually some empty space in there, which is always a bonus. Certainly compared to some of my earlier ones. And there it is. Yeah, you can drive around, switch between the motors and the robot arm, and it's a complete package. And it's come together reasonably nicely, I think. So, obviously a bit of fun. I think the point has been raised of, well, it's nice and geeky, but it's not particularly forward in the foundation's educational goals, which is probably a fair point. It's not something I actually set out to target for, sort of classrooms and so on. However, personally, I've learned quite a bit out of it, or relearned quite a bit about it. I've not really touched electronics since university, quite a long time ago. I used to do quite a lot more when I was a kid. So I learned things about resistors, transistors, the breadboard setups. It's actually the first time I'd used Python. Whilst I've known it's been around for a while, it wasn't until I got the Raspberry Pi, and obviously they have a lot of examples in Python, so another language to learn. Vastly improved my soldering skills. Obviously learned about servos, these different power sources, these different batteries, the importance of good power connections, that was a good one. And there's some other things that I've researched and not done yet. I think one of the bits that I would have liked to have got done is inverse kinematics, which is the bit where you say where you want the end to be, and then the computer works out where the joints have to be to achieve that. And in theory, that should be a lot easier to control than I've got at the moment, where you've got 6 different things controlling the different joints. So that's certainly somewhere I plan on going next. So I think for me, it's picked up or relearned old skills and learned a bunch of new stuff. And I think a lot of the stuff around, it is a case of, if you go out there looking for the information, you can usually find it. Done a bunch of stuff, or hang around on the Raspberry forums a little, and there are some people who go, how do I do this? You say, by doing this. And they go, can you provide a picture? Can you tell me exactly how to do it? And so on. And you think, well, if you took your post or question you put in the forums, just pasted that into Google, you'll find probably a lot of information and resources. So again, to try you can encourage people to actually think like that. If you go out there and look for the information, you've got a good chance to find it, instead of just always going, tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. So we can get that into kids at a younger age, that'd be nice. I'm very slowly, and I said this about 10 months ago, last time I gave this talk. So there's a little bit more there, but I'm very slowly on the how-to guide on my website. And obviously, again, I said last time, I want to make use of, I've got some, ultrasonic sensors, I've got cameras I can attach, motion detection, face detection, all that sort of things, there's things that I can do. And a lot of it can be done on just your box phone, Raspberry Pi on your desktop. And once you work out how to do it, you transfer it into your robot-y thing to actually make use of it. And I haven't exclusively been doing big Trak stuff for the past 14 months, although it doesn't look that way. I have I've done some motion detection stuff. I do actually have some set up on my my little desk, my little table out there, although it's well hidden, so you might not notice. But when I went on holiday to Hawaii a couple of months back for quite a period of time, and obviously leaving the house at home, so I set up about 5 Raspberry Pis around the house with cameras. Some of them set up to do just monitoring, some of them to set up motion detection, some of them set up to turn the lights on and off. One of them actually plugged into the back of the TV to turn the TV on and off. Unfortunately, that stopped talking to me the moment I left the country. I don't know why. But again, this is all stuff where I got out and did a bit of research and tried various things. Had a few issues where I got up one morning to find I'd been sent 800 screenshots of motion in the house. It's because my dad had turned up to do a bit of decorating. That took a little while to clear out of my inbox as I was just on the tablet. But it shows that it works. Most of the time I get 1 or 2 every other day, and it's usually a car going past and the lights coming through the window, or the neighbour walking past. But it proved that it worked. I've got thoughts and ways to improve that and bring it together. If you look on sort of forums, there's quite a few people who are looking at sort of Raspberry Pi specific home automation systems, and all these things sort of fit together. I got Raspberry Pi camera fairly early on. I was on the forums a bit for that as well, to get some of the streaming stuff sorted, to work out how we could sort of stream the input out and view it on a PC in a slightly easier way than the Raspberry Foundation's instructions were. They were not nice. Unless you have a Linux box, in this case, it's relatively trivial. And other various bits and bobs as well. I killed 2 Raspberry Pis now. I'm not sure what happened to the second one, it just stopped working. Maybe I'll try and fix it. And yeah, do it. Any questions?
Whose robot arm is that?
So this is a Dagu 6-degree freedom robot arm. It's about 150 pounds.
And do the buttons, do the original buttons on the robot still work?
No, I did consider keeping them, and then I decided they were just getting in the way and cut them off. My plans are to eventually replace that with some sort of LCD touchscreen, but I've not found one with reasonable size, quality, and price range to fulfil that yet. But that was sort of the ideas I have in the area.
Have you seen you doing set for things like the face recognition, various IK sort of bits and bobs, which you're saying is always on the to-do list?
Yeah.
Have you actually considered using Robot OS, ROS, and actually using that stuff that's already been built and building a model of your robot in that?
Possibly. I did come across that when I was originally looking at it, but I didn't look at it too much. I think at the time I was really looking at it to try and get some of the PS3 controller stuff working, and they did have some stuff that I think read the raw input. I might go back and revisit that, as it does look like it has a lot of useful stuff on there.
Certainly, I think you can actually run it on the Pi now, but if you can't, you can always obviously use the Wi-Fi and
yeah,
setup.
yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, at the moment, I'm mostly just stuck with sort of small Python things and so on. Again, stuff that I've put up on my website, so other people can use it.
It's definitely worthwhile. I think it saves a lot of sort of rework, if you know.
Probably, yes. I do have some, I think some Arduino code that does the IK stuff, and looks reasonable enough, but it's probably going to take me quite a while to work out what it was. I think there's someone else who says, oh yes, I've written it for this arm, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to keep it and I'm going to sell it, and it's like, and then never heard of again. So I don't know what happened to that one, which can be a bit irritating. The stuff I do tend to just try and make available. No reason not to, really.
Well, that's already been done. So the IK, so there's actually a feature of ROS or something. So it's worth looking at.
Your home monitoring 5 Raspberry Pis. Have you flood wired the house with Ethernet, or are you using wireless bridges? Or
Bit of both. When we got the house, we stripped it out and installed about 24 network connections throughout. So there is at least one or two network connections in each room. There's 8 behind the TV. About 6 are in use. Yeah, I do find that the Wi-Fi can be a bit flaky for the video streaming. So for most of them, they were hardwired. I did try various different sort of Wi-Fi adapters and so on, but some of them were okay, but most of them went into issues. Although I think for one of them, I did read that one of them, I think there was a bit of a bug in it, but it goes into power sleep and doesn't wake up properly. There is a way to disable that, but I think I've done that on that one. So one of them, yeah, it was quite happily streaming video, just wasn't talking to the network. I didn't want to see it. And then for the other stuff, I looked into, there's quite a few. I did look in the old X11 stuff, which is power line based, but that's really old now. And in the end I went for some lightwave RF ones where you can replace your wall switches, your light switches, your wall switches, actual working ones that are then triggered by radio transmissions. And then I got the transmitter so that you can run a piece of Python that can actually just turn things on and off. And I found a utility that basically synced with the Google Calendar. So you just create events saying light on at 9 o'clock, and you turn the light on and then off again. That seemed a little heavy on the Raspberry Pis. They're written in Ruby, so they're kind of a bit sluggish. So I'll probably end up doing my own one of that. The actual protocol is really simple. So talking to the Google Calendar is a bit more complicated, but yeah, there's things to do. Keeps me busy. Any others?
Are you available to come and talk to my student?
Depends whereabouts they are. I'm down in the Heathrow area, so it's a bit of a drive to get up here. Why not? So I attend. I'm asleep. So when the Raspberry London Jam comes back, it's supposed to, it hasn't yet. Trying to find a room. I certainly go down on a fairly regular basis, and I go to my local Raspberry Jam, which is in Egham, and like I said, occasionally we trips out to other places. So yeah, I'm quite happy to do so.
Teach control systems, so it's sort of right up that street.
Yeah, I'm open to various activities. So anything else?
Question at the back.
How many volts does the machine use?
So the servos run best at 6 volts. The Raspberry Pi obviously runs best at 5 volts. The motors, technically the original ones are about 3.5 volts, but I'm just running them at 6 volts as well. So just the two, 5 and 6 volts. I can probably do a whole 5 volts without a problem. Battery wise, the battery that I did have in there started complaining it was running a bit low just before I came in here, so I've been running from about 12 to half 3 on a single battery, which seems pretty reasonable for the size. And I think I'm about
Is
out
that
of
what
time.
stops it falling over? I would have thought with the arm extended it would be a bit...
Yes, once you cut power, it gets a bit floppy. Although that's not necessarily a bad thing.
But in terms of weight balance in the
It can-
base,
Yeah, it can.
the battery's at the back, is it?
It helps a bit, yes. I think I could do a bit more balance in the back as well. But if you don't have the battery, then it's nice to be more heavy. I have limited space. I've considered it, but there's not much more I can squeeze in there without seriously extending things. Okay.